It's great to be here. As Megan said, I'm with Headwaters Economics. We're an independent, nonpartisan research group, and we've been a partner on the Wildfires to Communities project with the Forest Service since its beginning. And we're really excited to be here and share a little bit about this work with you. I also I think maybe I get to be called a LANDFIRE alum. I worked on the LANDFIRE project when I was at the Nature Conservancy in the very early days of LANDFIRE 20 plus years ago. So it's really cool to be back here with you guys. Thanks for having us. Next slide, Eva. So what we thought we would do today is just provide a little bit of background about the project, how the wildfirerisk.org website came to be. And then I will toss it to Eva to walk you through the underlying data and science behind the maps and charts and resources that are at the website. I'll highlight a little bit about what's next, the exciting plans we have for the future for wildfires.org. And then, as Megan said, we'll have Q&A related to this project or anything LANDFIRE related. So we'll have time at the end for lots of discussion and questions. So starting with the overview and background, we really go back to the National Cohesive Strategy a lot when we think about this work. The 3 pillars of resilient landscapes, safe, effective wildfire response, and fire-adapted communities. And of course, at the core of all of that is science. And the work we do at wildfirerisk.org is really based in the best available science and data around understanding wildfire risk to inform all 3 pillars of the National Cohesive Strategy. But really, we have an emphasis on the fire-adapted communities portion of the cohesive strategy. And that's because, next slide, please, Eva. That's because we are seeing so many more communities affected by wildfire these days. As you all know, wildfires are increasing in severity, in duration, and in damage and destruction. Since 2005, more than 132,000 structures have been burned down by wildfires in this country. And this growing challenge means that communities now, more than ever, need accessible, easy to understand data about their wildfire risk so they can make informed decisions to mitigate risk before a disaster occurs, to manage and deal with the recovery after disasters. And we hope that wildfires.org is a go-to resource for communities all over the country. So next slide, please. Wildfires to Communities was created under the direction of Congress. In 2018, Congress directed the U.S. Forest Service to map wildfire risk to all communities for the whole country. Surprisingly, this was the first time it had been done. We had a lot of maps of wildfire hazard potential to vegetation, but not with this emphasis on communities and homes, structures. So this was the first time that a nationwide project had been developed to really think about risk at the community scale for the entire country. It includes data for all states, counties, tribal areas, and communities. And as you'll see, the website has interactive maps and charts, lots of data. And we take it one step further because we're not just handing communities information about the risk that they face, but also about resources they can tap into to reduce risk. It's really designed for community leaders. So the tool is designed for elected officials, land use planners, emergency managers, fire marshals, people like that who are on the ground making decisions day to day about the way they should be prioritizing resources in their community. So when you first go to the website, you can go to the next slide, Eva. There's a headline statement that gives you a really quick snapshot of your community's risk profile. And then there are 4 different measures of risk. And Eva will show you some of these in a live demo when we're done with the slides here. Each one of those you can click through and get even more information. So on the next slide, you'll see each of those pages has interactive maps and charts where you can pan and zoom and click and find out more about the different kinds of risk that your community faces. All of these are just now, and as of a new release a few weeks ago, downloadable, so you can grab these maps and charts and put them right into your own CWPP, slide decks, reports, handouts. We want you to share this information and use it in your own resources. And each page also links you to the most effective ways that you can reduce risk. So we have 10 different pages with lots of detailed information, including videos, handouts, links to other programs, including grants and funding resources, that can help you tackle all the multifaceted challenges of living with wildfire in communities. So there's a lot to discover and explore here, and we hope that you will click through and find all of these resources. We're also always trying to grow these pages, so if you think we're missing something, or if you have suggestions for what we could include, please, we're always all ears about what we can do to improve these resources. I want to point out that this is a national project, and so there are some limitations. It's nationally consistent data and metrics, which means it's really great at the national scale, and it can be used for comparing communities. But it's not fine scale. It's not locally calibrated. So it doesn't necessarily capture that local information that you might know about your community. But it's a really great starting place, especially for communities that might not have access to or funding to develop their own very technical fire behavior modeling and fire risk data. Our products are all grounded in the best available science. We're continually updating and improving these data, so you can be guaranteed that they're the best out there at the national scale. And we try to make it really easy to use, so you can find all the resources you need in one stop. But I want to emphasize this isn't a replacement for your local assessments. You might have state level data or local information that's going to be more accurate, maybe finer scale, than what we are going to be able to do at a national scale. So there are some limitations, but it still serves this really important purpose, and it's a great safety net for communities that need a starting point. This project is just a couple years old. We first launched the website in April of 2020, so it's about 6 years old. And it's already providing data for all kinds of things. Communities are using it for the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program. It is the baseline data set that's available to everybody for CWDG grants. It's being used for community wildfire protection plans, for prioritizing mitigation projects. Prospective homebuyers have access to this information. In fact, Realtor.com has integrated it into their online tools. And of course, it's being used by other researchers and by the media. It's a great place for national and local media to find quick information about wildfire risk. So we're seeing it across the board in both national and local media. That little box on the upper right is a snapshot of what you see at Realtor.com if you're looking at the risk factors that are in a home that you're looking at on their website. Next slide. One thing that we added in the last couple of years is this dashboard for community wildfire defense grants. Many of you might have seen this if you've applied for CWDG grants. Of course, this was a $1 billion program that Congress created. It will be launching its 4th round of funding, hopefully this summer. You can go to this dashboard at wildfirerisk.org, type your community's name, and right away see if you're eligible to apply for CWDG grants based on the data from Wildfire Risk to Communities. And we also provide data about the other criteria that are in that grant application, like whether you meet the low income criteria and whether there's a history of severe natural disasters in your community based on data from FEMA. So we're seeing this tool be really useful for communities. 90% of the applicants that received grants used the tool. And as a result, we're also seeing a lot of lower capacity, resource limited communities have access to this important federal funding program. So that's a really exciting tool, and we're going to be maintaining and managing that going forward as long as the CWDG program exists. Next slide. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eva, and she's going to walk us through a little bit about the underlying data and science behind wildfirerisk.org.
All right, thanks, Kelly. So I'll just start off saying that the Wildfire Risk Communities website and data sets all rely on primarily data from LANDFIRE to fuel the efforts, and all of the science or all of the maps and data that go into the program. And a lot of that science is based on not just science from the Rocky Mountain Research Station, but there is a lot of science from the Missoula Fire Sciences Lab, thinking mainly of Mark Finney and his early work on quantitative wildfire risk assessment that really feeds into and fuels the science background for all of the data sets. that we have on the website and also for download. So just kind of going into the main meat of what everything really is based on at wildfirerisk.org and also in the data sets that we provide through the Research Data Archive. This graphic it appears throughout the website, and it really brings sort of like these terms are sort of unifying throughout everything. They should be every piece of information, I think, on the website and in the data should link back to one of these areas. So there's kind of two umbrellas that combine to make wildfire risk together, the hazard element and the vulnerability element. So the hazard element is made up of, the things that happen sort of in the in environmental conditions. So it's composed of the likelihood of a fire, so the probability of a wildfire starting or spreading, and then the intensity of a wildfire, so the energy released by a wildfire. So once we have those things, we can combine them with the vulnerability side of things, which is that other side of the risk umbrella. So wildfire exposure is really just the spatial overlap of wildfire where there are things that we're interested in wildfire risk communities. That thing is communities or homes. And then the susceptibility is the other piece of the vulnerability side. And that's where a community may be harmed, what kind of effects will happen if a wildfire is to occur. So again, that's just sort of the umbrella of everything that we're talking about today. Oh, and I'm going to start my video because I thought I did, but I didn't. Sorry about that. And so let's move into how we do the mapping of wildfire for wildfire risk communities. It's based in the major element that runs everything in the mapping is a wildfire behavior modeling element. So the things that come out of the wildfire behavior modeling are those hazard pieces, the likelihood and intensity. And again, LANDFIRE is one of the major drivers of the data that we need to do that fire behavior modeling. And then we also need to have information about weather and fire occurrence. And I'll kind of pause on this slide here just a little bit to talk about some of the details of the inputs for those elements. So in this current version of wildfire risk to communities, we're calling it 2.0. It's different from 1.0. So we made some refreshes to the wildfire modeling to change basically the currency of the data, and there were some methodology changes as well. So in this current version, the LANDFIRE version is 2020. And so it represents fuel conditions at the end of 2020. So it also includes disturbances through 2020. However, the intensity information for this round was calculated with a module called Wildest, which is a special fire intensity module. And that fuelscape, or the information from Wildest, was updated with fires through 2022. So there's a slight difference there in the timing of the fuelscape conditions and the hazard conditions. And then the fire occurrence data for the modeling for this period was based on 1992 to 2020. So that's the Karen Schwartz fire occurrence database that's through 2020 for this version. And then the weather records also have their own time periods. The details of those things can also be found on the website, which is really handy. And I'll show you where those things are as we go through the demo. And then just wanted to tell you that there are going to be some FSIM updates coming for the next round when we do a refresh. So we can expect to use updated fuels information we'll be using LANDFIRE 2024 for that. We are making some improvements to the way we characterize what we call the ignition density grid, and that's going to give us a better characterization of human-caused ignitions. So we're doing a lot of processing on that, and it will also be based on the updated fire occurrence data set. We also will be working on potential refinements in the fuels data for the sagebrush biome based on some of the work that scientists here at the Fire Lab and other places are working on now. There's also going to be new and interesting and different cool weather input characterization and potentially some new pyram boundaries. So there's quite a lot coming that we're working on right now in the next LANDFIRE refresh to go into the fire behavior modeling. And just to kind of recap what what these outputs look like from the fire behavior modeling together, when we have the likelihood and intensity pieces, we can create the wildfire hazard potential map. And this is these two pieces, the likelihood and intensity, go through and are used in some of the layers in the wildfire risk communities separately, but we also provide this wildfire hazard potential layer at a 30-meter resolution as part of the data products that are posted on the Research Data Archive. So that's the hazard piece, kind of a map of the hazard piece. We also have to obviously map the susceptibility piece. And so for this, we mapped housing unit density. And this data set is based on a bunch of different data sets. One is the building footprints data sets. And then the other thing is we have to massage a lot of those data sets using US Census Bureau data sets to create the final housing unit density. So together, those things can combine to create what we have as our sort of bread and butter map that is kind of front and center at the Wildfire Risk Communities website. It's called Risk to Potential Structures. So this map characterizes for every pixel on the landscape what would be the relative risk to a house if one existed there. So it calculates this risk metric everywhere on the landscape, whether or not there's a house there or not. And on the website, this is searchable by community, tribal area, county, or state. And you can see down here, this includes these three elements of that risk, the risk umbrella that we showed at the beginning there. And I think I'll be ready to go over to the live demo. I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to go over and
while Eva's pulling it up, I'll just add that we just released a couple of updates just a couple of weeks ago. We've updated all the community boundaries and the searchable list of communities to reflect the latest data from the census and as well as data about vulnerable populations. So you might have seen a newsletter from us saying that we've got some new data, and now Eva's going to walk you through it.
Yeah, thanks. So this is the homepage, what you'll land on when you first arrive at the site. And most obvious are these three topic areas: understand, explore, and reduce. And then there's some other kind of periphery places you can go to that we'll get to next. But I'll start out with understand and just kind of talk about what people can use this section for. So again, we start out with the definition of risk in very simple forms. And then it goes through each element and gives a description of each of the elements. And what is really cool that I like about this is that it really links you to other parts of the website and tells you where you might find more information about wildfire likelihood in your community and how you could use it. So, likelihood, again, like we said, is the probability of wildfire happening in a specific location. And then you can jump right to the Explore page to find out what that looks like for your community, tells you how to do that. And then another thing that, is very cool that it links you to is the reduce page, where it'll tell you what kinds of actions the community could take to reduce the wildfire likelihood specifically. And it does that for each of the elements of risk. So intensity, and then as well as exposure, all of the different things you can do. And susceptibility. Susceptibility is an interesting one because we haven't talked about it that much, but it characterizes the effect the percentage of loss basically at that you could expect at the different fire intensity levels. And with wildfire risk communities, since it's a national effort, we're not able to map wildfire effects at at the level that we'd like to, as far as getting the percentage of loss at those places. So we do have a generalized concept of susceptibility for all of the landscape. So this section explains that, but then it also tells you how you can look at risk to homes and get an idea of what the susceptibility is in your area that you're interested in, and also the very specific things that actions you can take to do that. So the understand page is helpful in those ways. The explore really is where people spend most of their time. It's kind of the engine behind everything in the website. This is where you can go to enter your community. I am going to be boring and pick Missoula just because I've seen it a lot, even though, yes, we'll stick with Missoula for now. And it opens up to this pane that Kelly showed us a little bit earlier. The big statement here at the top is Missoula has a very high risk of wildfire, higher than 92% of communities in the United States. It's really important to know that this sentence is what we're getting the information about as far as how we characterize that risk to this place, because it can change. And I'll show you how, depending on what kind of geography we're looking at. And so these little tooltips, I'm going to say, are really helpful too. You can click on it and it can tell you exactly what is happening in this sentence. So since Missoula has a 92% percentile risk or number here, it's in the very high category, because it tells you which how these things are lined up, and this is how Missoula ranks nationally. So that's how this statistic is concocted. And then the next thing we might go to is to dig down deeper, and that's based on the risk to homes, that number there. And so you can see, again, this is the same number when you look at risk to homes and you open up the next page. This can change if you want to compare to not the nation, but the state. And then you can see that changes to, Missoula now there's an 81%, it has greater risk than 81% communities in Montana. So this is just a way that you can compare to different geographies with this community. And then, of course, there's the map and you can see how that risk to homes varies across the community. And you can see, in this neighborhood where I live, there's quite a high mapping of risk in those areas. So just ways to explore the data. And now, right now, since I have county highlighted, we're looking at Missoula compared to the county. I can go down to the scatter plot and I can see where does Missoula rank within the rest of the communities within the county in the scatter plot. So we can compare, Missoula is down here. It's a large city, population is high. We can see that with the population symbology. And then we can go up here and look and see, oh, Clinton, nearby to Missoula, is a small community, but very high in risk. So that's briefly a look at what the risk to homes data shows you. And like Kelly said earlier, it used to be that people would have to just take a screenshot if they wanted to put this map in their documents. But now there's this cool feature about that you can click on to download the map in a few different formats, and for digital or for print resolution. This is a very handy new feature. And then another thing I wanted to mention is sometimes I think people get a little confused. Of course, you can use the tooltip to find out more about this, but we added this risk calculation area. You can see in the map there's a boundary around the community, and that is the approximately 1.5 miles from the community boundary is where we do the calculations that I'll talk about later, or summary information. And that is because we don't do them only within the community boundary itself. We want to incorporate the area around the community because we know those areas also impact the risk for that spot. So that's risk to homes. I'll go down to likelihood next. Again, this is just a component of risk to homes, but it's a handy one to look at if you're interested in not thinking about what the intensity of the fire is in the area, but only looking at just what's the likelihood that your area, the areas of your community might have the annual probability of a fire burning in the area. So then again, there's another, I'm going to change back to the nation so that we can see more communities in the scatter plot. And it's just another scatter plot showing you here, Missoula is 90th percentile in the nation. And you can again compare to other communities across the country. So that's likelihood. I'm going to go next to another product on this in the pane in the options here. And this is the wildfire risk reduction zones. We call it the SWRs, the community wildfire risk reduction zones. And this, we sometimes refer to it as the WUI-like object. It's sort of like a WUI map in some ways, but it is different in key ways in that it is designed to indicate where different mitigation activities will be most effective at protecting homes and reducing wildfire risk. So here again, let's see, we're still in Missoula. We have these 4 different categories. Minimal exposure is usually at the community core. And these are areas that are greater than a mile from vegetation, anything likely to burn. And then indirect exposure is, this is kind of like the interface of the WUI. It is where our homes are within a mile of vegetation, so they're more likely to be ignited by indirect sources like embers and home-to-home ignition. And then direct exposure is similar to the interface, where homes are really directly within the vegetation, and so then they can be ignited by flammable vegetation nearby, as well as indirect sources. And then there's the wildfire transmission zone, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mitch, but I mean, it's 2.5 miles away from any community cluster or any housing unit cluster. And that is the green area here. And so there's different, these are kind of going out from the built environment out into the vegetated areas. And the idea there is that mitigation might be more like field treatments there as things that could help reduce the risk. An interesting thing that is presented here on the page is the numbers and the percent of buildings within each of those categories. And so, the idea is that community officials, fire folks can look at that and see, well, we have 70% of buildings in Missoula that are in this indirect exposure category. So they can then kind of think about their mitigation efforts and target those areas and target the resources for that situation. So that's the reduction zones. And then really this last one is the vulnerable populations page. Really exciting. There's so much here. Like Headwaters has done so much work to make this page very cool. And I don't know that I'll be able to scratch the surface about all things you can look at here. When I was preparing for this, I got lost just like comparing different communities. I would go to different communities and see there's just so many ways to look at it. So I'll start where it opens. It opens up, and this is talking about how different populations can be affected by wildfire disproportionately. So when the page opens, we have the community, and then there's all the census tracts that touch the community. And then highlighted in blue are the categories that are the highest ranked for this community. So in this case, for Missoula, it's people who are over 65 and people who have disabilities. So in those blue areas, those are the major concerns in those census tracts. And the table below will show you more detailed information, the numbers of people in the different categories for the whole community of Missoula. And actually, it's all areas in Missoula, so it's all the census tracts that touch the community boundary. So you can see families in poverty, 1,100 of them. That's 5.2%. And then, like I said, there's so many things to just look at here that you can consider. And then you can also click on a census tract to see a little bit more in particular about that census tract and the breakdown of the vulnerable populations within that census tract. And then, this really cool feature, also, we can pick 3 of the different maps, the wildfire risk maps, as background for these. So you can see, in this census tract, you can see the varying risk to homes in this area as well. And you can also look at likelihood and the risk reduction zones. So maybe you want to look at the risk reduction zones and see there's a lot of indirect exposure here and some direct exposure. Those are the kinds of things that, a planner might be looking at, a fire official might be looking at. I know I'm missing something here because there's so much, but this is another case where you can download the map for a report, like we showed earlier. We'll take questions later if there's more on this, but because I'm sure I'm missing something. So those are the main pages on the website. I'll just go back to the home page. And so we did home, understand risk, explore risk, reduce risk. Oh, we didn't do reduce risk. So the reduce risk, I'm not going to show too much here, just to say that it's a wealth of information about all the different kinds of mitigations a community could do to improve their risk scores or just reduce risk in their communities. So information on ignition resistant homes. So talking about different kinds of building materials. This is another place where Headwaters Economics did a ton of work to populate these, and there's all sorts of resources that keep coming in to populate this, the reduced risk section. But I think I'm going to leave it there because that's one that you could take a lot of time on your own to explore. Lots of resources there. I was going to talk about the about page in one part, just to say there's a section, if you go to the about and methods, this is a really helpful page that tells you if you have questions about how the data were ranked in the categories and the symbologies of the different layers. That's all here. I actually personally refer to this quite a lot. And when I have questions from the portal. And then I'm just going to move on to the download page. And this is where we get into where, if you have needs to go into more detail, you saw me click the button and it didn't change, but there it goes. If you want to go more into detail and use the raster data, the GIS data in your own way to summarize perhaps like to different polygon areas besides what we have in the wildfires.org, you can download the data and do all of your own custom analyses with the data sets. And there are more raster data sets here that are available just on the website to look through. First, the first thing you see here is that there's documentation. There's 3 white papers that you can click on to just open up right away and find out all the technical details you might want to know about the different sections or subsets of data. So we have methods for the data for all lands. These are the risk data that are mapped across all the lands in the United States. And then we have the methods paper for how we develop the wildfire risk reduction zones. And for this white paper, it also includes information on how we conducted the tabular summaries, which I'll show a little bit later. But it's sometimes people have a question about where to find the information about the tabular summaries, and it is in this Community Wildfire Risk Reduction Zones paper, not in the All Lands paper, just to clarify that. Then we also have a methods paper for the populated areas data sets. Then there's a tabular summary here that is a very quick look at summaries of the, oops, and I'm not going to open it actually. It opens up and it gives you an Excel sheet to open up quickly. So this is a smaller subset of summaries of not all of them, but many of the variables that people might be interested in. It's just a quick one to get to, but then we have further summaries packaged along with the GIS files that have a very extensive set of variables that are summarized. And here we can see here's an option to go to the GIS files for the different data sets. And then we can also scroll down and see, for the first kind of subset of all of the data that we have here, this is the data for all lands, and it includes the wildfire risk data for all lands. So one is the risk to potential structures, the burn probability, and actually Community Wildfire Risk Reduction Zones obviously has its own publication at the Research Data Archive, but the exposure type, blame length, this is where all the intensity data sets are together on the Research Data Archive, and then the hazard potential is also there, and along with the conditional risk to potential structures. And then there's a separate publication again for the data for the populated areas data. Yeah, all of those data sets here are available. Megan, were you gonna interject and tell me I'm going way too long?
I was just wondering if we should leave it there. We have about 15 minutes left for questions.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It seems like a decent place to potentially have folks engage and ask questions. I'm gonna launch a poll, an evaluation poll. Feel free to just drag that off your screen. And yeah, so who has questions?
I also wanted to leave some time for Kelly to finish off the presentation, and I can quit the demo here.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I think I don't think you even need to bring up the slides, Eva. Maybe you can just leave it here in case people want us to demo anything else. But I will just say we are planning a couple of updates. So in addition to the census data update we just completed in early 2027, we're going to be remapping wildfire risk for the whole country. So we'll have all new wildfire risk data. That's expected in early 2027. We're also going to be adding some success stories of community mitigation work. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, I just put a link in the chat, you'll see an invitation to share with us your stories about what you are doing in your communities to reduce wildfire risk. We really want to show that communities are taking action and help with some peer learning, so communities can learn from each other about tackling this big challenge that many of us are facing these days.
Yeah.
Kelly and everybody, I noticed you have a feedback mechanism on your website, and I'm interested, what kind of things do you hear? What's been coming back to you? What have you learned? What have you changed, etc., based on the feedback that you get?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think both Kelly and I can respond to that. I'm the one who takes the first crack at those feedback. It's feedback, and it's also a lot of questions. We get a real variety of questions. Some are really, really technical, and it's a lot of people who were wanting to use the GIS data and make sure they're characterizing it correctly for their analyses. And but it ranges from that level of like technical user to homeowners who write in there and say, "Hey, why is my risk like this? Why this doesn't seem right?" And yeah, so a wide variety of people. I don't know if Kelly, you want to add more to that, but
yeah, I think that's a good characterization. I would say one of the things we try to do is we actually catalog the feedback we get. And we try to take that in for every development cycle we have. So if we're getting a lot of questions about the same topic, we will try to address it in the next development cycle and try to improve that issue. So for example, we heard a lot of people asking questions about how the different layers were different. And we added a little blue window that says, learn how to use this data in each section. And it's an expandable window that you can go read more. So it's not in your face, it's not taking up a lot of space, but it's available for the people that like want to go deeper. That was something we added after getting some feedback. So we take it all really seriously. And I think the website is, designed to be really easy to use and easy to understand. And so this is a complicated topic. Wildfire, especially when you're thinking about how communities can address it, is really complex. And so we're always trying to improve how we explain things in a way that lots of different kinds of people can understand it. So we're always open to feedback. So please use that form and tell us how we can do better.
So as a follow-up, Kelly and Eva, how do you describe your audience? Is it mostly people involved in some way in municipal government or fire organizations, or what? Who's actually the audience for the website information?
Well, yeah, that's kind of I get maybe two questions. One, the audience, yeah, is different, not perhaps different than we get a feedback from all sorts of users, like I said, from a homeowner up to, a fire chief, or to somebody writing a CWDG grant, or federal employees trying to use it for, communicating risk, or so yeah, it's a real wide range of users. I'll let Kelly, I think you have a probably good spiel on like what it was intended for is, yeah, very specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, originally it was Congress, the intention of Congress when they directed the Forest Service to develop these maps, the intention was community leaders. So local elected officials, local fire personnel, land use planners, and we definitely see those groups using it. So, a lot of folks use this information for CWBPs. We see it a lot of our work is actually like copied or replicated or modified slightly into things like community websites about wildfire risk. So there's a like science translation part that people are using and borrowing, and that's great. We do get a lot of questions from homeowners, like HOAs, and that is not our intended audience, but they're finding us nevertheless. And so we do try to, bridge that gap with information where we can, but that is not the intent of the site.
Yeah, and I ask because the more diverse your audience, the harder it is to please, right? The harder it is to please both ends of it, as well as the sort of bulk of the middle. So it sounds like you do have that issue of having a real diversity of people trying to use the information. It just makes your job harder.
Daniel, you had a question?
Yeah, it's a bit technical, but I've read through the white paper, and I know in one of the sections it talks about oozing the burn probability into the more urban areas or buildings with structures. What was the thinking behind that? And did you do anything similar to that with the severity or with the intensity?
I'm going to take a first crack at that, but Mitch Lazar is also on to hopefully answer some questions too. He's really, he's got his finger on the pulse of the technical details. But first, why did we do oozing of the burn probability into urban areas? That's been a sort of a long discussed topic, I guess, throughout the world of the wildfire behavior modeling realm. The main reason is that there's no agreed upon fuel model for structures at this point. The fire physics world and the sort of structure fire behavior world hasn't really, been able to. I mean, it's not like it's easy to come up with some kind of way to model fire through the built environment. So until they do, and until we can incorporate that in a national mapping effort, the way that it has been determined, and this was, I think, first sort of developed. I'm not sure if there was any other effort before this, but the group Pyrologics had developed this method of doing this oozing, and it's really fairly basic, just like not basic, but I guess straightforward, just GIS smoothing exercise that sort of just estimates the fire into those areas, in a pretty simple fashion, just so that we can get, because we know that fires burn in those urban environments, so we want to get some idea of some way to characterize fire in those places. That is kind of, it's not a super satisfying answer, but it's kind of how it has been done so far. And I will say before, maybe if Mitch wants to take a crack at it too, that it is done for the intensity layers as well. It's done in a slightly different way, and I'd have to go back to the white papers again to remember that, but maybe Mitch has more to add there.
Yeah, there's two different oozing methods that are used for the burn probability. It uses a decay into non-burnable urban areas. So as you get further into the community, that burn probability decreases, while with oozing, the intensity component of hazard, there's that conditional risk to potential structures that is calculated on all burnable pixels, and that is smoothed into the non-burnable urban environment without a decay. So that intensity values in those non-burnable pixels are going to be very, very similar to vegetated areas just adjacent to those buildings. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I think that helps. Yeah. So maybe the paper could say there's two different types of oozing, because I noticed oozing mentioned for burn probability, and the technical term of oozing was not used for intensity. So thanks.
And I'll just add a non-technical note to this. This is a really important sort of emerging frontier in wildfire risk modeling, because we're seeing so many more urban conflagrations. And obviously we know homes are fuel, but mapping that, modeling that, incorporating it into risk maps at scale is really challenging. There's some really interesting work that's happening at a granular level, at community level, but doing it at a national scale. We've got, really the best science here, thinking about how to represent homes as fuel using this oozing and decay method. I'm going to just drop a link in the chat. Using Wildfires to Communities data, Headwaters Economics did a little analysis with some help from folks at the Fire Lab after the LA fires, and we found around 1,100 communities share the same risk profile as Los Angeles and other places that have had recent urban conflagrations, like the Marshall Fire and Lahaina Fire. And so, this is a really important part of Wildfires to Communities. We're trying to represent the risk to homes, the risk to communities and neighborhoods. And the science is rapidly changing. And so we're trying to make sure we're representing that best available information at a national scale. But there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of new emerging things in this world. So it's exciting.
Hi, I got a quick question for you guys. Thank you guys so much for the presentation. Super impressive. Really excited to poke around more. Seems like there's a lot to explore. So I think a big challenge with these type of projections is that time keeps on rolling, and you have to continue to update these things in order for them to be accurate and useful. And that's a big challenge. So what's your guys' workflow for updating all of this information?
That's a great question. Thank you. And actually, Eva, I don't know if you can, it might be too hard to share your screen at this point. It's probably not worth doing, but we have updated the website basically on a 9 to 12 month cadence. with the latest community boundaries. So we're constantly updating the wildfire risk summaries based on political boundaries, because those change regularly and those data are regularly, every year we're able to make those updates. The underlying wildfire risk data we launched first in 2020, and then in 2024 we did a complete remap of the whole country. And as I mentioned, we have another one planned in 2027. And the way our structure works, the great analysts at the Fire Modeling Institute do all the heavy lifting on the risk modeling, and Headwaters Economics helps represent it on the webpage. So we help to do with the science translation and the representation of the data online. So Mitch and Eva are right now in the midst of a whole new set of modeling, and we hope to have that launched in 2027. Because it's a federal project, the funding is variable, and we hope to be able to continue all of that work, of course. So hopefully if folks find this work helpful, it's something that can be continued. Eva, were you going to jump in there?
Yes, I was just going to say that this page is really helpful. This is the frequently asked questions page, and it just lists all of the time periods for all of the different data sets. Well, I think we're pretty exhaustive here, that are inputs to all of the different layers. And it is really, it's just a lot to keep track of, a lot of time periods to keep track of. And we got sick of looking it up every time, so we have it here for ourselves and others to notice. But yeah, if that helps answer the question a little bit, all of these things will need to be updated with each. Some things are refreshed at different at different time periods, but like I think we said earlier, the wildfire modeling will be refreshed hopefully in 2027. So there'll be a bigger update at that point. But we've, like Kelly said earlier, also we already refreshed the census geos, and we do that each year.
And it should be noted where the ability of us to update our work is dependent on LANDFIRE. So, LANDFIRE, as long as LANDFIRE is continually putting out updated and new data, we'll be building on that.
Sorry, I wasn't sharing my screen earlier.
There's one more question from Abdur Rahman.
Yes, thanks. Nice presentation. I've been using the community at risk map. It's been 1 year more than. I'm a graduate student at University of Hawaii, Manoa. So what I noticed that the map for Hawaii has a like lots of communities, lots of red areas. Like I mean higher risk area. But when I am doing the research, like it's not the actual high risk area, that area. So it's like I would definitely say as it's national level, there is a what is the data accuracy for the maps has. I noticed there is a mismatch in a granular level or in a state level as well. My question is, if how about the data accuracy?
Yeah, there's probably a technical answer to the granular technical data accuracy in terms of the scale of pixels. But I think probably what you're also recognizing is that for a national project, there are going to be things that we just can't capture, and that would need to be calibrated with local knowledge and expertise on the ground. But Eva, do you want to address the sort of granularity question?
That's pretty much what I would say too, is that this data set is a nationally calibrated nationally, and it's intended for larger area, like larger extents as far as the scale to be useful at those scales. We do find we get lots of questions on maybe a similar question of at a local level, at a smaller scale, the data don't seem to be matching what you're experiencing at that local scale. And we always say, if you can get locally refined, finer scale, and locally vetted input data for your models, that's what's more appropriate at at a, you know, sort of a sub-community level if you're going to be doing analyses at that level. Because yeah, again, like we take the 30-meter national LANDFIRE in as a major input. That's the foundational input. And those data sets are intended for, you know, those larger scale applications as well.